Hello, I'm Alice Hutchinson, the owner of Birds Books, an independent bookstore in Bethel, Connecticut, and I'm honored to be the host of Write America. The aim of this series is to help set the country back on a correct, productive course of freedom, justice, equality, and plain human kindness. Write America is a literary series created by author Roger Rosenblatt, featuring award-winning, nationally renowned authors and new and emerging writers in readings and conversations each week about how books and art might bridge the deep divisions in our nation. Roger Rosenblatt, the esteemed writer and creator of Write America, puts it this way: writing makes justice desirable, evil intelligible, grief endurable, and love possible. So welcome, and please join us every Monday evening at this time as many of the most beloved and distinguished writers in this country read from their works and talk to each other and with you in an effort to bring us together. If you missed last week's episode with Nick Flynn and Pablo Medina or any of the previous episodes of Write America, you can go to Birds Books Crowdcast channel and watch the recordings at any time. Tonight's episode is also being recorded. If you missed something, you can go back and rewatch. Tonight, Birds Books hosts a reading by and conversation with Carl Phillips, Coggin and Lloyd Schwartz. I will return after the readings and discussion to bring your questions and comments to the authors. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with Crowdcast, many of you have already discovered the chat to the right of your screen. Please feel free to comment throughout the evening here. But if you have questions, look at the bottom of your screen and you'll see a tab that says Ask a Question. That's where I'm going to go to look to see your questions to ask the authors at the end of the episode. 3, there is also a Purchase Authors Books from Birds Books. Please support the work of these authors and our little bookstore by the purchase of a book. Now about our first speaker. Carl Phillips is the author of 15 books of poetry, most recently Pale Colors in a Tall Field and Wild is the Wind, which won the Los Angeles Times Book Prize. Other honors include the Aiken Taylor Award for Modern American Poetry, the Kingsley Tufts Award, the Lambda Literary Award, the Penn USA Award for Poetry, and fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, Library of Congress, the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and the Academy of American Poets. Phillips has also written 2 prose books, The Art of Daring, Risk, Restless Imagination, and Coin of the Realm, Essays on the Life and Art of Poetry. He has translated Sophocles, and he teaches at Washington University in St. Louis. Please welcome to the screen, Carl Phillips. Let me find him. Good evening, Carl.
I feel found.
There you are. Enjoy.
Thank you. Thanks, Alice. Thanks to Roger for coming up with the whole idea, the whole concept. And thank you, Alice, for hosting us. And it's such a pleasure and honor to read with Kai and Lloyd. And I'm going to jump right into some poems from the very book that Alice mentioned, Pale Colors in a Tall Field. All right. This is called On Being Asked to Be More Specific When It Comes to Longing. When the forest ended, so did the starflowers and wild ginger that for so long had kept us company. The clearing opened before us, a vast meadow of silverrod, each stem briefly an angled argument against despair, then only weeds by a better name again, as incidental as the backdrop the ocean made just beyond the meadow. Like taking a horsewhip to a swarm of bees, that they might more easily disperse, we'd at last reached the point in twilight where twilight seems most a bowl designed to turn routinely, but as if by accident, half roughly over. Bells somewhere, the kind of bells that, before being housed finally in their towers, used to have to be baptized. Each was given to swing by or fall hushed inside of, accordingly, its own name. Bells, and then from the smudged edge of all that seemed to be left of what we'd called belief once, bodies, not of hunting birds, what we thought at first, but human bodies, in flight and lit from within as if by ruin, or triumph maybe at having made out of ruin a light, something useful by which, having skimmed the water, to search the meadow now for ourselves inside it, where, yes, though we shook in our nakedness, we lay naked as we'd been taught to do. When afraid, what is faith but to make a gift of yourself? Give, and you shall receive. Oh, that was the first poem. And I'm going to read the title poem, which means it's called Pale Colors in a Tall Field. Remind me to show you where the horses finally got freed for good. Not for the freedom of it, or anything like beauty, though their running was for sure a loveliness. I'm thinking more how there's a kind of violence to re-entering unexpectedly a space we never meant to leave, but got torn away from so long ago, it's more than half forgotten. Not that some things aren't maybe best forgotten, at a certain point at least. I've reached that point in my own life where there's so much I'd rather not remember that to be asked to do so can seem a cruelty almost. Bad enough some days that there's memory at all, though that's not exactly it. It's more what gets remembered, how we don't get to choose. For example, if love used to mean rescue, now it's more gladiatorial, though in the end more clean. Who said that? Not the one whose face I've described somewhere as the sun at that moment when, as if half unwilling still to pull itself free from the night's shadow grove of losses, it first begins to appear. No, not that one. And not the one whose specialty was making a bad habit sound more excusable by calling it ritual. Since when do names excuse? Wish around for it hard enough, you can always find some deeper form of sadness where earlier, so at least you thought, mere sorrow lay. I'd been arguing the difference between the soul being cast out and the soul departing. So I still believed in the soul, apparently. It was that long ago. I feel like I've spent 30 years explaining to people that I don't really say much between poems because I'm afraid that I'm going to say something stupid, but then I say it anyway. And just what I just said seems a little bit stupid. But now you've had a sample of my poetry chat that I have in between poems. All right, so I'm going to move to the next poem. This one's called A Little Closer Though, If You Can, for What Got Lost Here. Other than that, all was quiet, a quiet so quiet that, as if silence were a kind of spell, and words the way to break it, they began speaking. They spoke of many things. Sunset as a raft, leaving the water in braids behind it. Detachment, the soul, obedience. Swans rowing at nightfall across a sky filled with snow. What did they wish they could see that they used to see? To mean no harm, or to not especially just now be looking for it. What would they wish not to see? Could they stop seeing? Courage mattering so much less than not spooking easily. Maybe all nerve is. The search and rescue map wildflowers make of a field in summer. Deserving it versus asking for it versus having asked and been softly turned from. They said it would hurt, and it does. This poem is called Barbarian. That moment, for example, when you've left someone, even knowing you could stay with him and it could work and there's no one else, nothing like that, still you don't go back. Is that what's meant by free will? Or is that fate, what it's been all along? Sometimes, even here, in what's hardly by now the early part of the second half of my statistical life, where I've figured out how to be mostly alone, left alone, as in that's how I want it, it's as if I've let myself down, which only has to mean I've expected too much of myself. Of, not for, about that much, I think I'm still quite clear. Likewise, like being told to write a love poem without images can seem the only way I've known how to love a person, but that makes it sound like a bad thing. That can't be right. At this time of year, the best light arrives just before nightfall. It's when the trees seem most what they've always been, trees not questioning their necessarily unpersuadable selves, trees beneath which, after storms especially, I find the occasional downed bird, dead or, more difficult, still dying. Who can say what it counts for? But I believe not nothing, that I've rested my head on the ground beside it, that in what was left of the light, I sang to it. Hush now. You're not the first piece of gentleness to have crossed this hand. I guess that's the kind of poem you get when you lie underneath a tree next to a dying bird and sing to it. Sad, but I kind of recommend it. Here's a very short poem called Overheard Under a Dark Enchantment. Compassion first, we were told. And if that won't work, compassion's shadow, pity, to smooth what's rough. We find just holding the victim's hand lately has been exactly enough. A little epigrammatic, a little bit of a rhyme there. Once in a while I try to sound like a real poet. Apparently real poets rhyme, that's what people always tell me. Okay, and I'm going to finish with this poem called Ghost Choir. And I will say it's built on non sequiturs. So it's supposed to seem like, what? How do these pieces go together? That's how it's supposed to feel. Though it's somehow supposed to collage together, I hope, and feel like a good sweater. Okay, Ghost Choir. What injures the hive injures the bee, says Marcus Aurelius. I say, not wanting to hurt another this late should maybe more than count still as a form of love. Be wild. Bewilder. Not that they hadn't, of course, known unkindnesses and been themselves unkind. When the willow's leaves, back again, unfold all along their branches, the branches routinely in turn brushing then lifting away from the pond's face, it's too late. Last night, I doubted, as I've not doubted myself in years. Knowing a thing seemed worthless, next to knowing the difference between many things, the fox from the hounds, persuasion from the trust required to fall asleep beside a stranger, who I am and how I treated you and how you feel. So that it almost seemed they'd either forgotten or agreed without saying so to pretend they had. Did you know there's an actual plant called honesty for its seed pods, how you can see straight through? Though they've been told the entire grove would die eventually, they refused to believe it. The face in sleep, like a wish, wasted. To the wings at first a slight unsteadiness, then barely any. What if forgetting's not like that? Instead, stampeding, panicked, just a ghost choir of legends and rumors, of the myths forged from memory, what's true and isn't, that we make of ourselves, and even worse, of others. not the all but muscular ache, the inner sweep of woundedness. No, not tonight. Say the part again about the bluer flower, black at the edges. I've always loved that part. Skull of an ox from which a smattering of stars keeps rising. How they decided never to use surrender as a word again. Thanks very much.
Carl, thank you so much. Looking forward to seeing you on the other side. Our next speaker is Kai Coggin. She's the author of 4 poetry collections, most recently Mining for Stardust, which will be released on the 11th of this month, and Incandescent, published by Sibling Rivalry Press 2019. She is a queer woman of color who thinks Black Lives Matter, a teaching artist in poetry with the Arkansas Arts Council, and the host of the longest-running consecutive weekly open mic series in the country, Wednesday Night Poetry. Recently awarded the 2021 Governor's Arts Award and named Best Poet in Arkansas by the Arkansas Times, her fierce and powerful poetry has been nominated 4 times for the Pushcart Prize, as well as Bettering American Poetry 2015 and the Best of Net 2016 and 2018. Coggin is associate editor of Rise Up Review. She lives with her wife and 2 adorable dogs in the valley of a small mountain in Hot Springs National Park, Arkansas. Please welcome to the screen, Kai Coggin. Hi, Kai. And just before
Hi,
I leave,
Alice.
I want you to show your book cover because we don't have it yet, and you do.
Okay, I will. Thank you. Everyone, I am so honored to be here. Thank you so much to Roger Rosenblatt and to Alice at Birds Books and to everybody who helps put this amazing collection of voices together every single week. This is the book that she was talking about, not mining for Starbucks, but mining for Stardust. And I have my advanced reader copy, and hopefully I'll get those books sometime over the next week. But I am really excited about it. It is forthcoming November 11th from Flower Song Press. I'm going to dive right in, but the first poem in this book began on the first day of the pandemic lockdown. And it takes the reader through 2020, a year where all of us were forced to look inside ourselves and see what really mattered. We went through the pandemic and we're still going through it. We went through George Floyd being murdered, the summer of protests, the presidential elections, and I wrote poems about it. I wrote poems every week, and they are in this book. And I want someone to read it and feel like they went through this too, and that they survived and they got to the other side. So that's Mining for Stardust. The first poem is called Lazarus. It's Palm Sunday, a movable feast that has been moved inside, minus the palms, minus the hands, minus the peace. And I speak only in these fragmented psalms, but my palms ache to touch you. Bring my fingers to bless your cheekbones, sweep your eyes with supple thumbs, cradle your neck and pull you into me, our passion play. I lay myself down at your holy feet, bend my fronds under your weight, Lazarus me with your kiss. The lines of my hands shape words into worlds that want to blend with yours. Fortune tell a sense of longing and loss, and we are islands of want. Around the world, palms are empty, in waiting, in desperation, in quiet, prayered plea. We scrub and scrub, soaping the hope we will not become casualty. And lately this theme pervades all my poetry, these hours, days, months in solitary. I wrote a lot of poems about gardening during the isolation, and this poem is called Essence. I thinned the seeds already sprouting in the bamboo garden, the radish, beet, carrot, and bean, pulled each birth out of the earth and laid it on my tongue, crushed it with my teeth. And did you know that these tiny sprouts, these little leaves and baby greens already hold the heavy flavors of their final selves? If only we tasted our own essence from birth, knew the transformations to come were all part of the becoming, that we had the imprint all along. I appreciate Carl mentioning that banter between poems. I will try to banter a little bit. Today, in many different cultures, it is a celebration of honoring the dead. We have Dia de los Muertos, we have All Saints Day, All Souls Day. November 1st is a very special day. And as of today, we have lost 746,000 Americans and over 4.4 million people across the world to COVID. I wrote this poem on Memorial Day 2020, when we crossed over the 100,000 mark. And it's called Makeshift Memorial. We crossed over the 100,000 mark like it was just another Tuesday. No fanfare, no flourish of flowers left on 100,000 graves. Funeral-less limbo walkers who disappear like a fog into the history we are writing with our collective inadequacy to be decent to each other. A memorial is an object which serves as a purpose for memory or commemoration of something, usually an influential deceased person or a historical tragic event, according to Wikipedia. From behind a mask, I whisper 100,000 names on the day we call memorial, because something should be done to remember the living as they slip away. The uptick in numbers that were never just numbers, but bodies, full of breath, full of breath, full of breath, full of breath, knees and arms, ankles and bellies, cheeks that dimpled at smiles, gaps in teeth. Snores when she sleeps, feet that once learned to tango, earlobes once kissed in moonlight, curls of hair silken to white. His aching back that worked so hard in the field, her childbearing hips leaving children behind, hands and hands and hands that reach for mine in my mind, not just numbers, but human beings, reduced until the only common denominator is how quickly they are forgotten in this pandemic pandemonium. I can't sit with that. No, not today. On Memorial Day, we remember those who fought for our country and died, but half the country forgot those fighting in ICU beds just to stay alive, the collective death toll of our last 4 wars, and half of the country doesn't want to quarantine anymore. 100,000 dead while America throws pool parties. Beaches and boardwalks swarm with shoulder-to-shoulder crowds who dismiss the safety of the future for the party of now. Because this is America, land of the free, and don't tread on me, and nobody's going to tell me to wear a mask. And all of those soldiers who died in all of those wars, I guess America can tell them it's too much to ask to protect one another and help slow the spread. So happy Memorial Day. 100,000 are dead. A mass grave of indifference. Red-capped rebels drinking their bleach cocktails, and here they are banging on the door of my reverence to the lost, waving their AR-15s on the Capitol steps of this poem, and I breathe them out, and I breathe them out, and I breathe them out. I build a makeshift memorial in my heart for the lives we have lost. Photos and teddy bears and scraps of poems. I light 100,000 candles in the pit of my rib cage so that when I speak, only the light of them releases into the dark night of this country. I dance with their 100,000 ghosts. I lay their favorite flowers at all their perfect feet in the language of heart. I already know what their favorite flower is, and I lay a bright "She Loves Me" petal on each of their lips. So when they rise, they can breathe easy in the new ethers of beauty as they become new. We have to give them that grace. Even just a thought, a well wish into the stars, we have to give them that grace. Tomorrow in America, a new story named George Floyd will take our focus. We will move into fury or collapse into numbness, but today I am a makeshift memorial, a mouthful of epitaphs, a funeral pyre burning the sound of 100,000 names into a country that is too quick to forget. So I wrote that, and I read that tonight in honor of all the souls that we lost and are still losing to COVID-19. 2020 was definitely a year of grief, a year of reflection, self-reflection, standing up for what we believe in. But for me, I will always remember it as the year that I married my wife, Joanne. We've been together for 13 years, and we got married on Zoom in our garden, perfect pandemic-style wedding with just the two of us and our dogs. And so this poem is for her, and it was published in Poetry Magazine, which I was really proud of. It's called Filling Spice Jars as Your Wife. It seems like all my poems after this will be different. They will hold a different weight, like how the weight of my heart has shifted into indistinguishable float, into lifting cloud, into weightless flight tonight as the rain gently falls on the summer-heated tin roof, the din of casual raindrops and warm low lights glowing, the wind blowing through the house. We have all our doors and windows open. We have all our doors and windows open, and I am pouring spices into glass jars. Coriander, cinnamon, cumin, ground sage, and it's hard to describe this moment within the confines of a page. Tiny hills of vibrant color and intoxicating fragrance, and you hear the cadence of my heart from the kitchen, where you build perfect fitting slip-in shelves for our spices over the stove. Match the colors, match my colors to yours. I have all my doors and windows open to you. I have all my doors and windows open to you, and you have come all the way inside, sat down at the table of my deepest desires and lit a fire to warm us both. The wind blowing through the house, the rain giving way gently to turmeric sunrise. And you, darling, you are my wife. You are my wife, and it's like I have been waiting my whole life to say those words. And I feel held in a way that I have never felt before. To look down at my fingers dusted with ginger and thyme and see the gold of my wedding band glint and shine in the warm, low light glow. I am yours, and you are mine. Promised on Zoom in our garden of giant zinnias and hummingbird vines, sung out in the morning song of bluebirds. This union that ripples love out to the world and infinities back into us again. Love. In the fine powder of these spices, ground up essence of oregano and basil, I see our love in every atom suddenly, and every cell in me finally exhales. And perhaps that is the wind. Perhaps that is the wind blowing through the house, this release of eternal searching and finding you there, calling me your forever, naming me your always, to have and to hold, till death do we part and start all over again, only looking for each other's hearts, taking my life in your hands eternal, marrying me to the heavens, latching me to the star trail of your white dress in this orbital dance, this lift and spin, this knowing from within that all of my poems after this will be different because you are my wife. Thank you so much. Mining for Stardust.
Oh, Kai, that was so wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Alice.
Of course. Wow. Our third speaker is Lloyd Schwartz. He's the Frederick S. Troy Professor of English Emeritus at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, the longtime classical music critic for NPR's Fresh Air, scholar and editor of the works of Elizabeth Bishop, including the Library of America's Elizabeth Bishop Poems, Prose, and Letters, and FSG's Centennial Edition of Bishop's Prose, and the current Poet Laureate of Somerville, Massachusetts. Among his awards are the National Endowment for the Arts and the Guggenheim Foundation Fellowships for his poetry and a Pulitzer Prize for criticism. His poems have been selected for the Pushcart Prize, the Best American Poetry, and the Best of the Best American Poetry. His most recent poetry collections are Little Kisses and Who's on First, New and Selected Poems, released in August of this year. Please welcome to the screen, Lloyd Schwartz. Let me find you here down here, Lloyd. There you go. Thank you.
Alice, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for taking up Right America. And Roger, thank you for starting it and for putting the three of us together, which is just it's just been thrilling and wonderful to hear you, Kai and Carl. Gorgeous poems. And Carl, I have to say, I don't think I've ever heard you say anything stupid in all the years we've known each other. So, okay. A true poem. I'm working on a poem that's so true, I can't show it to anyone. I'm sorry, let me start again. Alice, I am getting an echo. And is there any way to fix that?
The only way I've discovered to fix an echo would be to sign out and sign back in, which is just fine. We've got it. It won't take you but a minute.
Okay.
But you're welcome to sign out and sign back in. And sometimes Crowdcast just gets glitchy that way, and I apologize for that.
I don't know when. Now I am getting I'm getting an echo, and it's very distracting.
Okay. And that didn't happen in the tech rehearsal, in the earlier rehearsal. So go ahead and sign out and sign back in.
How do I do that?
All right. On the upper right above your face, you go to the top and there's an X and it says close video. And then you just sign out. And I want to hear, and I'm going to remind you all that there are questions to be asked at the bottom of this screen. So now's a chance while Lloyd signs back in, that you can ask questions that I will ask, because when he is done reading, the other two come up and they hold a discussion. And so at the end of their discussion between the three of them, I will ask your questions. I have a list of my own, but I'd love to hear yours. So let me see if he is back and I can let him on screen. I'm going to invite on screen. And hopefully this will work.
Okay.
Is that better?
Well, no.
Can you live with it?
I'll try.
All right. Take one ear off. Sometimes that works too.
Okay. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Alice?
Yes.
Okay, great.
You're good.
A true poem. I'm working on a poem that's so true, I can't show it to anyone. I could never show it to anyone because it says exactly what I think, and what I think scares me. Sometimes it pleases me. Usually it brings misery. And this poem says exactly what I think. What I think of myself, what I think of my friends, what I think about my lover. Exactly. Parts of it might please them. Some of it might scare them. Some of it might bring misery. And I don't want to hurt them. I don't want to hurt them. I don't want to hurt anybody. I want everyone to love me. Still, I keep working on it. Why? Why do I keep working on it? Nobody will ever see it. Nobody will ever see it. I keep working on it even though I can never show it to anybody. I keep working on it even though someone might get hurt. This is a love poem. It's for David, my husband. Crossword. You're doing a crossword. I'm working on a puzzle. Do you love me enough? What's the missing word? Do I love you enough? Where's the missing piece? Yesterday, I was cross with you. You weren't paying enough attention. You were cross with me. I wasn't paying enough attention. Our words crossed. Where are the missing pieces? What are the missing words? Yet last night, we fit together like words in a crossword, pieces of a puzzle. Alice, you mentioned that I've done a lot of work on Elizabeth Bishop, and one of the perks of doing that was that I've actually had a chance to spend some time in Brazil, where Elizabeth Bishop lived for many years. And this is a poem that came out of one of my trips to Brazil. It's called Small Airport in Brazil. 9:31 in the departure lounge. Nearly deserted. Monday night. Everyone here is a little too tired to be traveling to another city. I search for an interesting face behind the newspapers and light on a young man, maybe 31, slim and well-dressed, that is, dressed with some thought. His tan jacket and pressed gray pants in muted harmony with a pale yellow shirt open at the collar. No tie, though there may have been one earlier. They fit him elegantly, suit his thin, sandy hair and pale, fair skin. His rimless glasses suggest seriousness, not fashion, a tone confirmed by the forward gaze behind them, through them. He wears a touchingly simple gold band on his finger, another example of natural elegance. His wife must share his taste. Is he on his way to her? Is she picking him up at another small airport? Will they embrace warmly, gracefully when he arrives? Or will she be up waiting for him at home, dinner on the table? Or not, already asleep when he finally gets in, after her own long day? Or is he on his way to yet another hotel, after a week of hotels, tired of hotels, while his attractive, witty, attentive wife, with her eloquent cheekbones and slightly sunken cheeks, begins to show her own weariness of spending so many nights alone. They'll cost something, these nights. Everything costs something when you have to make your way through the world, even if you're not new to the idea or just beginning not to be new to it. I'm going to read 2 more poems. This is called My Doctor's Death. George Burns, at 99, puffing on his cigar, confided to us that his doctor had warned him to stop smoking, then noted that his doctor had died many years ago. Probably not a bad doctor. For many years, I had a great doctor, someone I could count on, not only for my physical health, but for my general well-being. I could tell him anything, everything, and he'd listen, always knowing just what to prescribe, and not just medications. A few years ago, he retired. He was ready. It seemed the right time. I missed him, but of course, I knew I wasn't the only patient he treated with such thoughtfulness. He deserved a rest from all those obligations, those loyalties. He'd earned it. And then the other day, I heard that he had died. A fast-moving and devastating disease causing him great pain. No doctor could stop it. He deserved a long and happy retirement. He'd earned it. We say, physician, heal thyself. But isn't that just irony? Who can prevent his own disease? We know, but the mystery remains. I told the doctor I broke my leg in 2 places. My doctor liked Henny Youngman. He told me to quit going to those places. And Irving Berlin. What'll I do when you are far away and I am blue? What'll I do? Doctors aren't supposed to die. How could he die? And my last poem is a dialogue with my mother. It's called He Tells His Mother What He's Working On. I'm writing a poem about you. You are? What's it about? It's the story about your childhood, the horses in the river. The ones that nearly drowned? I saved them. You told it to me just a few weeks ago. I should dig up more of my memories. I wish you would. Like when I lived on the farm and one of the girls fell down the well? Yes. I forget if it was Rose or Pauline. It was a deep well. I remember that story. Have you finished your poem? I'm still working on it. You mean you're correcting it with commas and semicolons? Exactly. When can I see it? As soon as it's finished. Is it an epic? It's not that long. No, I mean all my thoughts, the flashes of what's going through my life, the whole family history, living through the woe, the river and the water. I know. Will it be published? I have to finish it first. It's better to write about real life. That's more important than writing something fanciful. I try to write all my poems about real life. You see, the apple never falls far from the tree. I guess not. You're my apple. There's probably a worm crawling through that apple. Then it's got something sweet to chew on. Well, you're my tree. Yes, I'm your tree. You're an apple. I'm a tree. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hi, friends.
Hello.
Hi.
I think we were just splashed onto a screen, so now we have a conversation, huh?
Well, that was wonderful. I mean, it was really great to hear you. Kai, this was a first for me. Carl, I think I've never heard you read better, and I've always heard you really beautifully.
Well, thanks. It was lovely to hear you read as well, Lloyd, and you, Kai, as well. And yes, it was the first time hearing you, Kai, read loud. And I loved all these poems. I love the choir they made together too.
Yeah, I do too. I love that we wrote about our love and our queerness and our who we are in the world. And I didn't really know that necessarily about all of us, that was something that we shared.
I didn't.
And so I love that we were all paired together this way.
I wonder
just
whose
really
idea that was.
Yeah, I was wondering too. I thought, how did this all happen? But yeah, I like it.
At the beginning of the at the beginning of the reading, Alice asked me if I wanted to keep that part of my bio in there. She's a queer woman of color who thinks Black Lives Matter. And I said, absolutely, keep that in there, because I live in Arkansas. And at any point that I have an audience, I want that line especially to be read. And it has been kind of difficult for me to live as a bright blue flame in such a red state. But so I'm sure you all can understand that, and writing the poems that I do. So I'm glad that line was in there, and that was something that all three of us share. So I just really appreciated that, and I wanted to say that out loud to both of you. I loved your love poems.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I think that it's funny because I was thinking about this, that you mentioned a wife, a husband, and I was thinking about how I'm the only unmarried one here. I mean, I have this partner who's upstairs waiting for dinner. But I was thinking about that, and I also take I take your point, Kai, about feeling like you're a lone blue flame. I mean, I do live in St. Louis, which is a blue city, but it's surrounded by Missouri, and a very beautiful state. But it's still, after all these years living here, it's such an odd thing. And it still feels like an act of real resistance to have a Black Lives Matter sign in front. That too. So it's. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. It makes me think too about the different ways in which our poems are, people always ask, do you write political poetry? And I feel as if everything we read was political in its different way, including just being honest about who we are, whom we love, how we love. And yeah, I like that.
Absolutely.
Tomorrow is election day. And
it is.
In Somerville, we may have either our first Black mayor or our first woman mayor.
Oh.
And
those are good odds.
And they're both terrific.
That's wonderful. I like what you said, that Carl, about just having that Black Lives Matter, even if it's a sticker or something. You can't see it in this screen right now, but I have a transgender youth sticker that's behind me.
Uh-huh. I know, it's a strange
Echoing.
noise. I don't know what that was.
That was awful.
I just took my headphones off because I'm
That was it.
Lloyd,
That's
it's your
why.
headphones. Go
Put them
ahead.
back on.
all right. Sorry.
You can
Oh,
try
it's because of the
unplug.
headphones?
I try unplugging them if you want,
Yeah,
and just use the
it's gone
computer.
away now. Yeah.
Yeah, that was it.
Okay.
But sorry.
In the chat, my friend Zoe said that Jericho Brown writes that every love poem is political. Every political poem must fall in love.
Mhm.
And that's just beautiful. Thanks, Zoe. But I have a sticker about transgendered youth because here in Arkansas, they're trying to do everything they can to take protections away from transgender youth. And growing up in America, you know, even when I was younger, 20 years ago, going through that, just coming out as a queer woman, you know, it was so difficult. And now it's just, it seems to just continue to push back. And so wherever I can, and I'm sure you too do the same, I just try to be a safe space for people and be visible and show that, you know, we are out here, we are writing these poems, we are loving the people that we love, and we are resisting in our own personal and political ways. Especially in these last 5 years, it's been really important to just intentionally do that.
I agree. It's been something that I sometimes worried in these last years that I was not doing enough in some ways. And then, but you know, there are all kinds of forms of resistance. And I agree with you, Kai, that just being in public, just acknowledging whom you care about, and also, in my own case anyway, being sure to put that sort of work in front of students and
Exactly.
not as a special, you know, here's our special Black Lives Matter unit or here's our queer unit, but just this is poetry, and you're going to encounter this multiplicity of voices every week. So,
can I ask how you each fell in love with poetry?
You can.
Do you want to go first, Carl?
I mean, I don't know if it's. I fell in love with it as a kid. That my mother wrote poems for fun. We'd write poems about my sisters and me. You know, just birthday poems, occasional poems, things like that. But she was in some kind of book club back then. You know, this is the 60s, and so different books would sort of like scholastic books. So she would order these different books for us, and we could pick books that we wanted. But she would always make sure that there was a book of poems that was included. So each month there seemed to be, you know, these sort of nursery rhyme poems or something a little more sophisticated. So I've always just thought poetry was a natural way. It wasn't really falling in love with it. I just thought, oh, this is a kind of like a song. And I joked about rhyming, but I loved that the poems rhymed, unlike stories that you read. There was something you could memorize them. I don't know. How about you, Kai?
I fell in love with poetry sort of as a necessity, as a means of survival when I was young. And I didn't really know that it was poetry that I was writing. I was mostly just writing my feelings down, my secrets, my hidden longings, my questions about, you know, why do I like these girls? Why do I feel different? You know? And so it was that curiosity and that keeping of words that were sacred to me that really developed into this love of language. Also, my mom bought me Where the Sidewalk Ends by Shel Silverstein, and that was on my bookshelf when I was little. And I'm not ashamed to say that. I loved that book as a kid, and the rhyming and, you know, just the imagination of it all, that it just opened this whole other world of possibility for me. But now, as a woman and as a teaching artist in this state, that's my mantra, is that poetry is a safe place for your feelings. And through the Arts Council now, I get to go to schools all over the state and teach about 3,000 kids a year, K through 12, the tool of poetry, give them that little sword that they can use for the rest of their life. That, you know, poetry is a place where you can put that pain, that rejection, that misunderstanding, those questions, that love, everything like that can go into a poem, you know, and you give them the devices to use as well. And it's just like this whole new world opens. So I'm still in love with it. I'm madly in love with poetry still. Thank you for the question, Lloyd.
Yeah,
that was beautiful.
It's a good question. I love that answer that you have, Kai. I mean, that's not how I fell in love with it, but that is why I write still. This idea of survival. You know, I agree with you. What about you, Lloyd?
You know, it's funny, Carl, you mentioned that the poems you read as a kid were like songs.
Mm-hmm.
And I always loved popular songs and I love popular music. I never thought about it as poetry. And I had a really great English teacher when I was a senior in high school. And he would stop at nothing to make us interested. And it worked. You know, he would jump up on his desk and recite Macbeth. And we read Robert Frost's Fire and Ice and Ode on a Grecian Urn. And I thought, my God, these things actually mean something. And they're about something and they're beautiful. And I didn't think I could ever write poetry like that, but maybe I could write my own poetry. And that took a while.
Yeah. Great.
I have a question for both of you.
Go ahead.
Gallus
Go ahead.
coming back.
Nope.
Okay. I know that both of you are distinguished and prestigious scholars and educators and professors. Did you see a time in our history where you might have shifted from the traditional poetry canon to a more diverse poetry canon and more contemporary living poets? Did you notice a shift in your teaching and in your pedagogy over the years? And when did that happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. And sometimes it feels very recent. I mean, when I first started writing in the late 80s, early 90s, I only knew, for example, of two Black poets who were living, Rita Dove and Yusuf Komunyakaa. I didn't know there were a whole bunch of others. And I also didn't understand when I was writing my own poems, people were acting like I was doing some kind of new thing, writing about queerness. And I thought, doesn't everyone think this way? Doesn't everyone feel this? And so it feels to me, I feel as if it's maybe 10 years ago. I mean, not that I didn't know there was diversity, you know, and I certainly, when I got here to Washington University where I teach, I was asked to teach a survey of African-American poetry from the start. And so that part was there already, but things like the Norton Anthology used to include almost no Latinx people, no Asian American poets. So I don't know. I feel like I probably have been thinking about it for 20 years, but I feel as if it's in the past 10 years, especially with things like Kave Kanem coming into, and Kundiman and Cantamundo, that there's so much, the poets themselves are making a point of being heard. But I don't know, it feels still very new.
Yeah.
Thank you. It does. Lloyd?
Yeah. I think the sort of traditional canon, which was kind of how I grew up with poetry, was that it was important to get my students knowledgeable, to read that, and that I was getting from my students the newer people. But it in fact, it turned out that a lot of the people that I was teaching and reading in the canon were Gwendolyn Brooks and Elizabeth Bishop,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
So in some way it was more important to see what they were doing as poets rather than in terms of any kind of political message.
Sure.
One of the things that's so interesting about Bishop is that so many of her unpublished poems were much more explicit about her sexuality, and they're some of her best of poems.
I don't mean to cut off this conversation, but I really want to ask a couple of author book related questions, if you don't mind. Okay. And thank you. This has just been an amazing discussion. I want to know, what book have you read, whether it's poetry or otherwise, that you wish you had written?
I'll just jump in.
All right.
I mean, I want to say there's not such a book, because I never want to have written anyone else's book. I feel like, well, it wouldn't be my book. But if this is about like a book I admire so much, and I wish I could write a book that was as admirable and worth returning to all the time, I think for me, a book I read every single month still is Linda Gregg's first book called Too Bright to See. And I think it's been the most influential book for me on my poems. And I keep returning to it, and it never, I mean, I love all of her poems, but that first book seems as if I've taught it. I've tried to memorize poems from it. Anyway, that's my answer.
Yeah.
Here's mine. Oops. Nine Gates.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
Nine Gates by Jane Hirshfield is mine. Mm-hmm. And it's a collection of essays, and it's masterful. And I return to it often. And when I first read it, it was like my spirit was meeting another spirit that really had this deep understanding of the way that I see the world, the way that I observe nature and beauty and, soul and spirit and light. And I love this book. So Nine Gates. I know that my light is really blurry, but Nine Gates by Jane Hirshfield.
Yeah. My answer has to be that it's either every book I've ever fallen in love with, or that none of them, because they're not mine, and I love them because they're not mine. And so every reading is a revelation. It's a cop-out.
No, not at all. Some people really come up with something immediately, and other people just, it's not a question that resonates with them either. One question I do want to ask, because I am a bookseller, is what is on your to be read list? What's the top of your to be read list? Other people's work.
Yeah, go ahead, Kai.
Okay. I'm lucky enough to feature 3 writers every week with the reading series that I host, Wednesday Night Poetry. And so I've just gotten this slew of new books and writers. And the most recent was by Kelly Crescio-Moeller, and it's called Shade of Blue Trees. And I'm just really excited to read that. I heard a couple of poems from it, and I was just like, mail me this book right now. I need to read the rest of it. It's called Shade of Blue Trees.
I'm about to start reading a new murder mystery by my friend Clea Simon called Hold Me Down. And I think she's a wonderful writer, and I just read a terrific memoir by one of George Balanchine's dancers with the New York City Ballet, named John Clifford, called Balanchine's Apprentice. and I was enthralled by it. And I read a great biography, big fat biography of Mozart called Mozart by Jan Swafford, which I loved.
That sounds like a lot of reading. Good reading, though. I
was just going to say, Louise Glick has a new book out, which I haven't looked at yet, but I can't wait to read it.
Well, I guess my answer is, I mean, I have a book that I've been wanting to read for a couple months, but I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to. It's a book called Japanese Poetic Diaries, and it's a guy whose last name is Miner, like coal miner. Basically, he translated and brought together 4 diaries, and I know of one of them very well, the Basho's Narrow Road to the North, but the other 3 I've never heard of, and in particular 2 are by women, and of course I know women wrote back then, but I've never known these diaries to be there. So I'm sort of interested. I'm teaching a course on the poetic sequence, and I was interested in how the poetic, like a diary made of haibun, can be a sort of poetic sequence. And I'm also delving into the work of Cedar Sigo, S-I-G-O, and he has a new book of poems called All This Time. But I also just got a book of essays by him, which I think is called Guarding the Mysteries. And I'm just interested in his very different approach to poetry from anything that I ever think about in poetry. And I'm excited about that.
Well, this bookstore owner always wants to know what everybody's reading and what inspires them and who you read that isn't you, and what, so I very much appreciate your sharing that and the evening. And we're going to wrap it up and as much as I hate to do this, there is an end time to all things, and I really have enjoyed immensely being with the 3 of you. So I will say goodnight and say goodnight to everyone. Thank you so much, folks.
Thank you, Alice.
Oh, of course.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carl, Kai, and Lloyd for participating in Write America this evening, and to everyone who tuned in tonight. And thank you to Roger Rosenblatt for creating a great series to look forward to each and every Monday evening. Remember, we have the author's books, and I hope to see you next Monday for readings from Major Jackson, Lee Herrick, and Frank Bedard. Thank you very much.